Take a look at the device you are using to listen to this right now. I mean, it feels solid, right? Like it's just glass, metal, maybe some plastic.
Yeah, it just feels like dead matter.
Exactly. It's just stuff.
But what if I told you that according to this really mind-bending collision of ancient philosophy and modern quantum physics, that device, and even the hand you are using to hold it, is actually made of frozen thought?
It is such a radical shift in perspective. Because, we usually think of the universe as this giant empty room filled with lifeless objects.
Right.
And somehow, just by pure chance, some of those objects woke up and started thinking. But today's source material completely flips that script.
It really does. And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We are taking a deep dive into an incredibly dense but genuinely fascinating text by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
Yes.
It's a chapter called Philosophy of Divinity, the Psychological Evidence. And our mission here isn't just to, summarize his work.
No, we're doing much more than that. Right. We are going to trace the entire evolution of how humanity has conceptualized God. So we are going to start with primitive humans, terrified of the weather, move through the rigid logic of the Greeks, and finally arrive at Al-Waily's wild modern theory involving biological paradoxes, photons, and a universal mind.
And as we go through this, it's important to note that we're looking at everything from ancient mythology to stark materialism to religious mysticism as vital data points in the human quest for meaning.
Yeah, absolutely.
We aren't here to take sides or endorse any specific worldview, left, right, religious, or secular. We're just here to impartially examine the profound logic and sometimes the profound psychological need behind why people believed what they believed throughout history.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Al-Waily starts at the absolute beginning of human history. And it's fascinating because, early religion wasn't about high-level philosophy at all.
Not at all. It was purely practical.
Right. It was about survival. You look at the Babylonians, and they are worshiping the sun and the moon. The Greeks worshipped Zeus, who, let's be honest, wasn't a philosopher. He was the literal embodiment of thunder and lightning.
That's a great point. And you have the Magi worshiping fire because of its dual power. I mean, it can ripen your crops, but it can also burn your village to ashes.
Exactly. It's like early humans were caught in this terrifying, chaotic factory with gears grinding and steam blowing in their faces.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, and they were just desperately trying to figure out who the manager was so they could, ask him to turn down the heat.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how this early phase was entirely reactive. Al-Waily references the sociologist Emil Durkheim here.
Oh, right.
Durkheim argued that this primitive totem worship was the very origin of religion. It was humanity's raw reaction to the untamed, unpredictable forces of nature.
So you basically personify the storm so you can negotiate with it.
Exactly. But as human society stabilized, as we built shelters, established agriculture, and our brains had more time to sit and think rather than just survive, that factory manager analogy stopped making sense.
Yeah, we didn't just want to survive the lightning anymore. We wanted to understand the underlying structure of reality itself.
Which means the concept of divinity had to evolve. I mean, you can't just have a guy on a cloud throwing lightning bolts once you start studying mathematics and planetary orbits.
No, you really can't. The math kind of ruins the myth.
Right. The physical became the abstract. And that is where the Greek philosophers step in. Plato comes along and subjects the idea of God to rigorous mental principles.
Okay.
He defines divinity not as a being with a physical body, but as the ultimate ideal of the good. He argued that everything in existence has causes, including a teleological cause.
Hold on, let's break that down for the listener, because teleological is a pretty heavy philosophy word. What does that actually mean in plain English?
Sure. So teleos is the Greek word for end or purpose. So a teleological cause means something was created with an ultimate goal in mind.
Okay, got it.
Think of an arrow being shot from a bow. The teleological cause of that arrow flying through the air is the target it's meant to hit.
Okay, so Plato argued the universe isn't just random motion. It has a direction, a purpose, driven by this ultimate good.
Exactly. And then Aristotle takes that idea and tries to solve the problem of motion itself. Aristotle looks around and sees that everything is moving or changing.
Right, like constantly.
But his logic dictates that something cannot move itself without a prior cause. Like a rolling stone was pushed by wind, the wind was caused by temperature changes, and so on.
But you can't have an infinite chain of causes, right?
Right. So Aristotle argued for the unmoved mover, a first cause that is entirely unchanging, eternal, and exists completely outside of time and space.
That makes sense.
And what's fascinating here is how Aristotle believed this unmoved mover caused motion. It doesn't push the universe physically.
Wait, then how does it move anything?
Instead, everything in the universe is drawn toward this unmoved mover by a sort of natural desire or cosmic longing.
Oh, wow.
Everything is trying to move from its raw potential into its perfect actuality, drawn by the perfection of the unmoved mover.
That is such a massive leap from just worshiping a thunderstorm.
It really is.
And what I loved in the source material is how Islamic philosophers later took that Greek foundation and basically built an absolute fortress of pure logic on top of it.
Oh, absolutely. Thinkers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina didn't rely on myths at all.
No, they used like mathematical level deduction.
Al-Farabi's argument is a brilliant example of this. He divided everything our minds can conceive into two categories: possible existence and necessary existence.
Okay, possible and necessary.
A possible existence is something that could exist or could not exist without breaking the universe. A tree, a mountain, you, me, we're all possible.
Because we require a cause. Like, we required parents who required parents.
Exactly.
Right, but Al-Farabi says you can't just have an infinite chain of possible existences stretching backward forever. It's like, well, it's like a train with an infinite number of boxcars.
That's a perfect way to look at it.
Even if you have a billion boxcars, if there isn't an engine at the front that moves under its own power, that train is never going to move.
Right. To explain why there is anything at all instead of just nothing, there has to be an engine. There must be one necessary existence. Something that exists by its very nature, requires no prior cause, and started the whole chain.
And they defined that necessary existence as God. It's a completely airtight logical loop. Later scholars like Ibn Arabi expanded on this, introducing a form of conceptual pantheism where existence itself continuously emanates from this divine entity.
Literally preparing physical matter to receive life and consciousness.
Exactly.
But this raises a huge question, and it's something I kept wondering while reading this section.
What's that?
If Aristotle and Al-Farabi proved this with such flawless, airtight logic, why didn't the debate stop there? Like, why wasn't the case closed in the Middle Ages? If it's practically a mathematical certainty that there is a necessary existence, why do we have hundreds of years of intense philosophical arguing afterward? That is the exact tension Al-Waily explores next. The reality is that human consciousness evolved again. The shift from the medieval world to the Enlightenment changed how we viewed truth itself.
Okay, how so?
What deeply satisfies a medieval logician, like a perfectly constructed syllogism on a piece of parchment, doesn't necessarily satisfy a modern thinker who is obsessed with the scientific method and internal human experience.
So the logic just wasn't enough anymore.
Right. Logic alone began to feel too detached, too cold. I mean, it explained the engine of the train, sure, but it didn't explain the human soul.
So philosophers had to start looking for completely different types of proof.
Precisely. Take René Descartes. He threw out the external universe entirely. He famously doubted everything he saw, deciding his senses could be lying to him.
The classic "I think, therefore I am" moment.
Exactly. So he looked entirely inward at his own mind and formulated the ontological proof. Descartes reasoned, I am a flawed, imperfect, doubting being, and yet I possess in my mind a crystal clear concept of absolute perfection.
Which, if you think about it intuitively, makes no sense. I mean, how can a flawed machine invent the concept of flawlessness?
Right.
It's like a calculator that is broken. It can't spontaneously invent a perfectly correct equation out of nowhere.
That was Descartes' exact point. He argued that the lesser cannot create the greater. Since he, an imperfect being, could not have organically generated the concept of infinite perfection, that idea must have been planted in his mind from the outside.
Oh, wow.
And the only thing capable of planting the idea of a perfect being is a perfect being. Therefore, God must exist.
Okay, so Descartes looked inward at his own thoughts. But did anyone look outward, like at how humans actually behave with each other?
Yes, and that brings us to Immanuel Kant. And Kant completely sweeps logical proofs off the table.
Really? Just ignores them.
Pretty much. Kant didn't care about unmoved movers or infinite trains. He looked at human morality. Kant observed that humans possess this internal law that tells us what is right and wrong.
The categorical imperative.
Exactly. And the crucial part is that this moral law often demands that we do things that go entirely against our own survival, our own comfort, or our own pleasure.
Like sacrificing yourself for a stranger.
Yes. Kant argued that a purely physical universe, driven only by survival of the fittest, cannot explain that kind of selfless morality.
Right, because evolutionarily, that's a terrible strategy.
Exactly. For Kant, you cannot have a binding universal moral law without a divine moral architect who instituted it.
But while these guys are arguing over internal logic and moral architects, there's a whole other group that thinks this is all just academic nonsense.
The mystics.
Yes, the ascetics.
The mystical traditions are fascinating because they bypass the chalkboard entirely. We'll see this in Hinduism, in early Christianity, in the Sufi traditions of Islam.
They weren't writing syllogisms.
No, they argued that divinity isn't a math equation you solve. It is a direct, blindingly powerful, internal experience.
And the how is really important here, right?
Very important. They believed you could only achieve this experience by physically stripping away the distractions of the material world. Through fasting, meditation, and asceticism, they essentially starved the physical senses until the spiritual reality became visible to them.
But of course, the moment you have people claiming they see internal blinding lights, you get the exact opposite reaction. You get the materialists and the atheists.
Oh, inevitably.
And they look at the logic, they look at Kant's morality, they look at the mystics starving themselves, and they declare all of it to be a massive psychological illusion.
And again, we're neutrally relaying Al-Waily's breakdown of these factions here.
Right.
He outlines how figures like Sigmund Freud dismantled religion psychologically. Freud didn't see God as a necessary existence. He saw God as a derivative of human trauma.
Yeah, Freud always goes there.
He argued religion was a manifestation of our repressed sexual life, our prolonged childhood need for a protective father figure, and our profound, paralyzing fear of death.
And then the existentialists pile on, essentially saying that God is just a psychological projection we created to calm our existential dread.
Exactly.
Like we are terrified of the idea that we are just floating on a rock in a cold, random, meaningless universe. So we invent a cozy narrative to make ourselves feel safe.
For the materialists, there is no universal mind.
Yeah.
There is no divine lawgiver. There is only dead matter interacting blindly according to the laws of physics.
Which brings us to the most critical pivot in the source material. Because if the materialists plant their flag on the idea that everything is just dead, blind matter, well, Al-Waily realizes they've trapped themselves in a massive, unavoidable biological paradox.
Yes, they really have.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because Al-Waily doesn't attack materialism by quoting scripture. He attacks it using biology.
That's the genius of his approach.
He says, okay, let's agree with Charles Darwin. Let's agree on evolution, that higher life forms evolved from lower life forms over millions of years. But he asks one massive question that stops the whole thing in its tracks.
What about the very first living thing?
Yes, that single microscopic cell that supposedly generated spontaneously from dead matter.
What's fascinating here is how strictly Al-Waily defines the boundary between dead matter and life.
Okay, how does he define it?
To transition from inert mud to a living entity, that entity must possess three specific traits: will, deduction, and memory.
Let's focus on deduction for a second, because when I hear deduction, I picture, like, a detective solving a crime, not an amoeba in a puddle. How does a single-celled organism use deduction?
In biology, deduction at its most primitive level is the ability to distinguish what is good for survival from what is harmful.
Okay.
Even the absolute simplest life form has to interact with its environment and deduce whether to move towards something like a nutrient or retreat from something like a toxin. It has to make a choice.
And to make a choice, to have that will to survive, it requires memory. It has to somehow know what is good and what is bad. But here is the paradox Al-Waily points out. If this is the very first living creature in the history of the universe, it has no parents.
None at all.
It didn't inherit any genetic ideas or instinctual memory from a previous generation. And the dead matter it just spawned from the carbon, the water has no memory.
Exactly. Dead matter doesn't remember. Dead matter doesn't deduce. So how did this very first parentless organism know how to survive the exact millisecond it was born?
It's a huge problem.
Without prior ideas or memory, it couldn't make deductions. Without deductions, it couldn't exercise the will to survive. According to strict materialist logic, it should have just remained inert, dead chemistry.
But wait, let me play devil's advocate here. Couldn't a materialist just argue that what looks like deduction or will in a single cell is really just a blind chemical reaction?
How do you mean?
Like, if I mix baking soda and vinegar, it fizzes and expands. The baking soda doesn't choose to react to survive. It just blindly obeys the laws of chemistry. Couldn't the first cell just be a really complex fizz?
That is exactly the materialist counterargument. But Al-Waily pushes back by focusing on the difference between passive reactions and active preservation.
Okay, what's the difference?
A chemical reaction, like baking soda and vinegar, is destructive and final. It neutralizes itself.
Hmm.
It doesn't learn, it doesn't repair itself when damaged, and it doesn't try to replicate itself to continue a lineage against environmental resistance.
Ah, I see.
Life actively pushes back against entropy. To do that, it needs a biological software that tells it how to operate.
It's like turning on a computer that has no hard drive, no operating system, and no programmer. And yet, the moment you plug it into the wall, it instantly starts protecting itself from viruses, optimizing its battery life, and searching for a Wi-Fi signal.
Yes, perfect analogy.
Where did the software come from? You cannot get complex software just by mashing a plastic casing and some copper wire together. You can't get memory and the will to live out of dead rock.
So, following this biological paradox to its logical extreme, Al-Waily arrives at his most profound conclusion. If dead matter cannot spontaneously create the memory and will required to jumpstart life, then the only logical answer is that the matter was never dead to begin with.
Oh, wow. And that completely shatters the materialist worldview. Matter isn't dead.
Al-Waily introduces the theory of mental matter. And he doesn't just pull this out of thin air, he grounds it in quantum physics.
Okay, this is where it gets crazy.
He points to Albert Einstein's famous equation, uniting energy and matter. The logic goes like this. When you break physical matter down past the molecules, past the atoms, past the electrons, down to its absolute final, most fundamental state, it loses all its traditional material properties.
Like mass and solidity.
Right. It becomes pure energy. It becomes photons. Light.
And Al-Waily calls these fundamental units mental monads, or zurat.
Yes.
He argues that at the absolute quantum level, these photons aren't just blind vibrating energy. They possess a rudimentary baseline form of consciousness or mind.
Which means the chair you are sitting on, the water you are drinking, the stars in the sky, they are quite literally made of mind.
This raises an important question about how we conceptualize our entire reality. I mean, if the fundamental building blocks of the universe are these conscious mental monads, then the universe isn't a giant empty room filled with dead rocks.
No, not at all.
The entire universe itself is one vast, interconnected, universal mind.
Yes.
I know what you're thinking at home. This sounds incredibly like The Matrix or some sci-fi simulation theory. Is Al-Waily just saying we are all lines of code in a giant cosmic computer?
Not quite. In a simulation, there is a physical computer sitting somewhere running the code. Al-Waily is saying the code is all that exists.
Wow.
The materialists say that mind and consciousness are just accidental byproducts produced by dead matter. Al-Waily flips it completely. He says that physical matter is just an expression, an idea produced by a living mind.
So what does that make us? What are human minds in this framework?
According to Al-Waily, our individual human minds, what he terms partial minds, are just highly evolved, concentrated clusters of these mental monads.
Okay, partial minds.
We are small, localized pockets of the universal mind that have gained a degree of independence. So when you touch a table, you aren't a mind touching dead wood.
What am I doing then?
You are a partial mind interacting with the ideas and thoughts of the universal mind, which your senses translate into the feeling of solid wood.
It's like we are characters in a massive novel. We think the table in the story is made of wood, and we think we're made of flesh. But really, both us and the table are made of the exact same substance, the author's thoughts.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And what I found so compelling about this source material is how Al-Waily connects this cutting-edge quantum philosophy straight back to ancient scripture. He cites Surah An-Nur from the Quran, which states, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth.
Which takes on an intensely literal structural meaning in this context, rather than just a spiritual metaphor.
Exactly. If the fundamental absolute state of all matter in the universe is photons, which is light, and this light is the conscious substance of the universal mind, then God is the light of the heavens, and the earth perfectly describes the physics of reality.
It connects the quantum to the divine.
The universe is composed of quantum energy controlled by a single overarching consciousness.
But we must be careful to distinguish this from traditional pantheism.
Oh, right, like Spinoza.
Exactly. Thinkers like Spinoza believe that God is nature, meaning God is just the sum total of all the rocks and trees and galaxies, and God has no distinct personality or will outside of that physical stuff.
Right. For Spinoza, God is just another word for the universe.
Yes, but Al-Waily's mental pantheism is distinctly different.
Because the mind is still in charge.
Precisely. He argues that the universal mind maintains its distinct identity, its will, and its limitless power. Because physical matter is fundamentally just ideas or frozen thought, This universal mind can effortlessly rearrange the matter of the universe.
It can alter reality just as easily as you can change a thought in your own head.
Exactly.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back and look at the incredible journey Al-Waily just took us on.
It's been quite a ride.
We started with early, terrified humans shivering in a cave, trying to appease a thunderstorm by imagining a giant man in the sky. Then human intelligence stabilized, and we moved through the rigorous clinical logic of the Greeks and Islamic scholars, mathematically proving a necessary existence.
And then we waded through the modern philosophical clash. Internal morality, ascetic mysticism, and stark cold materialism.
And just when materialism seemed to have the final word, we arrived at the biological paradox of the first living cell, a paradox that forced a total reevaluation of what physical matter actually is.
Right, leading us to this astonishing realization that the very atoms making up your body, the air you are breathing, the phone you are holding, they might all be tiny fragments of a universal thinking consciousness.
It completely rewires how you interact with the world. I mean, a simple rock on the ground isn't just dead stuff floating in a void.
No. It is frozen thought. It is an idea being actively sustained in the mind of the universe.
And that leaves us with a final, rather provocative implication of Al-Waily's work for you to ponder long after we finish here.
Oh, I like where this is going.
If he is right, and all matter is indeed composed of these conscious mental monads, then the physical separation between you and the rest of the world is just a trick of your perception.
Right.
You aren't merely a being existing inside the universe. You are a localized thought that the universe is actively having. So the next time you have a totally original, brilliant idea, you might have to pause and ask yourself, is it really your idea? Or is the universal mind simply thinking through you?
Well, that is absolutely going to keep me up at night. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. It's been an incredible journey. We will catch you next time as we keep unpacking the most fascinating ideas out there. Take care.